Would you like an opinion on a financial matter you're dealing with? Whether it's about retirement, investments, taxes, or 401ks, Scott Hansen and Pat McLean would like to help you by answering your call. To join Allworth's Money Matters, call now at 833-99-WORTH. That's 833-99-WORTH.
Welcome to Allworth's Money Matters. Scott Hansen, Pat McLean. Glad you are here with us. We're talking about financial matters. Both myself and my co-host, we're both financial advisors, certified financial planner, chartered financial consultant. Essentially, we've been doing this stuff a long time.
Yes.
Doing this program a long time.
30 years.
20,
Is that right?
almost 29 years.
Oh, all right.
It was right before my daughter was born. My oldest daughter is now,
Yes.
hard to believe, 28 years old.
Yes. My oldest is buying a home.
Mine just did.
Oh, she did? Congrats. Maybe. I don't know.
What do you mean?
It's scary. Well, not for me. It's just part of growing up.
Yeah. It's funny. I was talking to my daughter because I helped her with the home. I imagine you helped your son. You're helping your son with. Okay.
Yes, a little.
And she says, "Dad, of my friends who have homes, I don't know anybody who was able to buy a house without the help from some parents." That's what she said.
Interesting.
She said a handful of friends that already home. Well, not already. She's 28 that own homes. She says, "I don't know any who didn't get some help from their friends." And I thought, how much more challenging it is today than, say, 30 years ago or 60 years ago or whatever.
Yes. It's I don't know if it's just geography dependent or just life in general. Do you think it's geography dependent?
Yeah, I think some professions pay relatively the same regardless of where you live, and you can have a very nice lifestyle in a different parts of the country as opposed to living in New York City or downtown San Francisco.
Which, by the way, has a massive impact on commercial real estate in large cities because companies are now realizing that people will work for less if they work remotely in a less expensive place.
Or in a less expensive place.
Or work remotely in a less expensive place, so therefore the companies can pay them less and they will still take the jobs.
That's exactly. Well, particularly now, the employment market's changed quite a bit in the last year.
So you used to compete for a job 10 years ago if you were something that was acquired in office. You competed with the people in your geography.
That's exactly right.
And now it's the equivalent of onshoring, where the companies were offshoring years ago because they could get lower labor costs in certain parts of the world. Now they're realizing, we can do the same thing with American workers by having them work in, small town, middle America.
Well, there's a lot of people who are willing to take a lesser pay to go elsewhere.
For a standard of living, which actually might be higher.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So our studio here is in Folsom, California, Northern California. We're a suburb of Sacramento. And I've lived in this community 30 years, roughly. A couple more years, like 30 years, and kind of watched the region grow. But there's been a lot of people over the years that they would choose to get a job in the Bay Area. Actually, a couple weeks ago at Super Bowl, I'm talking to a buddy of mine. He says he was getting up at 5 a.m. the next morning to drive to Silicon Valley for work. And he says he goes down there like Monday and Tuesday and works remote because quality of life and lifestyle is so much less expensive in the Folsom region compared to Silicon Valley.
And the point being,
3.5 hour drive
is in commercial real estate, we're seeing massive disruptions in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Atlanta, because of this change in work, where some of the commercial real estate high rises in San Francisco are down 70% from their high. 70%.
Or more.
Yeah. And so when you think about diversification in your portfolio, you think, holy smokes, who could have ever predicted a pandemic would change a cultural shift in how employees consume their work environment? Who just like, and So I know my friend.
And like even our company, we've been trying to get people to come in back to 4 days a week. And there are some people that work in the office 5 days a week. There are others, maybe they're 1 day. I mean,
right?
They do good work. And they're like, sorry, this is what I'm doing. Like,
and you're like, okay. But so it goes back to, so I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who he said, the commercial real estate people that are in the commercial real estate many of them believe that this is like, there shouldn't be a place for equities if you can do commercial real estate. And there's people in equities that say there shouldn't be a place in commercial real estate if you can do equities. And I say an asset is an asset is an asset. And you could get exposure to real estate investment trusts, traded, not non-traded that are sold to you by salespeople. But the point of diversification is to protect yourself from things that
Pat, there was an article just the other day about someone who had very large wealth a couple of years ago. And you think about this. So I had a run the other couple of days ago with a buddy of mine who's he was in banking as most of his career, and then now he does private lending, like this whole shadow banking that's emerged the last decade. A lot of these commercial loans are not through banks anymore. They're through these private lenders that sometimes are syndicated and sell them off in little pieces or whatnot, the loans on these. And just we were talking about the challenge with a lot of these loans. It's not like a mortgage. You buy a house, you put 20% down, you get a mortgage.
And it's
one,
fixed.
You've got a fixed rate. Two, it doesn't matter if your home goes up 30% in value or down 50% in value. It doesn't matter how many rooms you're occupying or not occupying. As long as you're keeping up on your property taxes and insurance,
they're good. And paying your mortgage.
There's nothing that the bank can do to say, I don't like you anymore, where he wants your house. It's different in commercial mortgages. So a typical commercial mortgage will have a couple things. One is the interest rate is usually fixed for a short period of time. 5 years, 7 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, pretty rare. But it's usually a shorter period of time. And then it resets.
Yes.
Secondly, there are what are called covenants.
Which mean
that the landlord, the owner of the building who had taken on the mortgage and typically signs a personal guarantee on it, states that, one, we're going to have a certain amount of occupancy in the building. Two, our rent rolls are going to be at a certain amount. So we're going to collect X dollars for rent. And three, we'll make sure that we always have at least, say, 20% equity or 30% equity, some amount of equity in the building.
And if they miss the covenants,
they have to come up with cash.
Or they'll call the loan completely.
Or they might, if it's way underwater, the lender might extend and pretend, right? I mean, try to milk this, keep this thing going on. So I heard, it's the same guy was telling about the story. This was an office building in Marin County. He said 3 years ago, it sold for $72 million. The mortgage was roughly 50% of the value.
Okay, $35 million.
Went into default. Went to auction. The note sold for $8 million.
No.
Yep. So that's the kind of bloodbath because there's almost no one lending.
Yeah. So you've got to be cash buyer. $8 million.
$8 million.
And that person that bought it needs to be very patient because they're either going to cut the rates, which, by the way, creates a spiral, right? So now that person that bought it for $8 million,
cut what rates?
They could cut their rent rates in order to keep the building full, which actually then causes
the building wasn't very full at all.
Yes, but but for $8 million you could charge,
which is the problem, right? So this guy buys a building, probably some family, maybe a few families coming together, thinking they're being conservative, just a 50% mortgage. They only have 50%, but yet the value fell almost 90%.
So the new buyer goes in there and says, "Hey, I don't actually need that much of a return in order to justify my $8 million purchase. I'm going to lower my rents," which then causes the rents in the whole geography to go down.
They're going to want to fill up they're like, this is great.
Yeah.
We only paid $8 million for the building. Small loan. I'll reduce rent 50%. What do we care?
Yes. And it creates a spiral. But the point being, you're going to own assets in your portfolio that you're going to be unhappy with because you're going to compare them with other assets. Right? So bonds, what, last year you were unhappy with.
Last year was a wash. The year prior.
The year you were unhappy with, right? And you're going to compare them and you say, why don't I own more of this or why don't I own more of that? But the idea behind diversification, and I hate to say it, is that you should be unhappy with about a third of your portfolio at any one time.
I think there's a second thing to pay on this particular story, though, is debt.
Debt.
There's no such thing as a free lunch. When you take on debt, you need to understand what the implications are. And actually, I don't think this is an extreme story I've told at all. I think this is going to be happen all across the United States.
Yes.
I remember years ago counseling a group of dentists decided to become in the development business. And so they bought some land and built a couple gyms. And then the financial crisis hit. And they weren't able to sell the memberships like they thought. And suddenly what happened is they had these personal guarantees, which are very common.
Yes.
And what went from nice, secure finances, secure retirement, they were dentists tend to do. They were all independent, all did fairly well. They went. Most of them went into bankruptcy.
Not even past the capital call. They just.
Well, there was no way they could come up with it, but they were so far underwater.
So
just like this building, this example of this building.
It is.
And that was.
So the point being, for that long story is diversification. It's diversification. You should. I'm just. When you look at the portfolio, if you're disappointed with about a third of the things that you own at any point in time, and you know why you own them, what it is every asset class goes through its own little market cycle, and it all doesn't happen in tandem. So what
very rarely happens in tandem.
So what you hate today,
probably tomorrow's winner,
and what winner today,
maybe tomorrow's loser.
That's right.
Same thing with you look at different. The reason their index funds, Pats, have grown so much is because people look at these investment performances from individuals and they're like, well, yeah, you did really great the last 5 years, but just because you were a top performer the last 5 years doesn't give us an indication that you will be the next 5 years. And in fact, typically, the only reason they had overperformance is they happened to own those types of asset classes that were outperformers. And just by maybe pure luck.
Right?
Or that's the bias that particular manager had.
Right?
But they're not going to be this. They're not going to be able to switch into the next set of outperformers.
Think about the Janus funds in the late 1997, 98.
Yeah, right? Then they all blew up.
All of them. Anyway.
I don't think that name exists anymore, does it?
I don't know.
Janus Henderson? And not to disparage the company, or I'm sure they've got some.
It's just their asset classes that they were prone to.
Well, usually when something's on fire, look, these are businesses too.
They go through market cycles.
And they try to raise capital. There's, hey, look how good we're doing here. Look at a 5-star fund. Open for, we're going to close it soon. Bring your assets in. All that kind of stuff. All right, we're going to take some calls. Let's go to Deanna. Deanna, you're with Allworth's Money Matters.
Good morning. How are you?
We're fantastic, Deanna. Thank you.
Hey, so my question is on inherited IRAs. I actually have received 2 IRAs that are being held at 2 different companies.
And when did you inherit these?
Just last year.
Okay.
22.
All right. And It was not a spouse.
No, it was a parent.
Okay.
And so one of the investment companies has told, and my parent was already receiving his required minimum distributions.
Yep.
And so one investment company told me I don't have to take required minimum distributions as long as the account is empty in 10 years. and the other one insists on sending me required minimum distribution. So I'm looking for.
So here's the challenge.
What is the rule?
Which tax act was that, Pat? It was so tax law. It was one of the tax packages.
I don't remember.
Okay, so this is a recent change, because in the past it used to be you can stretch an inherited IRA over your life expectancy. So like my father,
was 5 years ago,
My
you
father
could.
passed away 4 years ago. Small IRA, and I'm taking out as little as I can, and it's based over my life expectancy, which is much longer than 10 years, I hope. But no, statistically it is, right, based on the chart. But the laws change, but there's still some questions in there that we're all waiting for the Treasury to give clarification on.
Right. So what do I do between here and there?
What we should be doing is let's think about the things that we can control, right? Which is, how old are you?
62.
And are you currently employed?
Yes.
And how much are these IRAs?
Couple hundred.
Okay, so $200,000.
Couple $100,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So $200,000. Are you contributing to your 401k?
457 and 403B or something like that. 503B,
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay. And are you doing the maximum?
Yes.
You are. And your spouse? Are you married?
Yes, my spouse is retired.
Okay.
Do you think your income is going to be significantly less in the future, your taxable income?
No.
You think it's going to be higher?
Well, you've got 20-some thousand that's going to be dropping through.
Right.
Like, what's the
That's what
point?
I'm
My
trying to
question is,
manage.
so let's pretend like you have two financial institutions, and they have two different interpretations of the law that's been somewhat murky. And look, I'm speaking. There could have been some clarifications, Department of Treasury recently that I don't know about, but I'm just saying. This isn't the only situation that we've had things like this from this particular tax bill regarding inherited IRAs. But you still might be better off taking out 1/10 every year, because what you don't want to do is leave this. Let's say that you just let it all grow, and suddenly it's the 10th year, and this 200,000 is now worth 350, and you got to cash it in. Now you've got 350,000 dropping on your tax return all in 1 year.
Which was exactly where I was going with this is, look, you know that this thing needs to be empty in 10 years. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, how do we actually phase that emptying of that over the next 10 years? When do you plan on retiring?
In the next couple of years.
And your income will stay the same in retirement as it is while you're working?
I think so, because I'm putting, the maximum into the deferrals right now.
Well, then it's a wash. I would
Well,
take it
might not
over.
be.
I would take it over
the
10 years.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to defer it just
That's
because
right.
the way the tax system works, it's so progressive and steep. So, your taxes on these inherited IRAs for people could go anywhere from 0 because of standard deductions, up to 37%. So the first few dollars we have coming into the households taxed at 10%. Then the next chunk's taxed at 12%. Then 22%. Then 24%. Then 32%. Then 35%. Then 37%.
And
then you live in the state of California, so that's anywhere from 0 to 13.3%. So what we would hate to have happen, let's assume that you're in a tax bracket where you're in the let's say you're in the 22% tax bracket, which is actually a very large tax bracket for the feds. I'd much rather see you take these distributions over 10 years and remain in that 22% tax bracket than to defer, and then the 10th year, suddenly you're paying at 37%.
Okay.
right. So this
So it
idea
doesn't really matter what the rule is then. It's
Yeah,
just
well,
better to take it.
In your situation,
Yeah, and we know it has to be empty in 10 years, much different than your 401k, 457, 403b, right? You've got room to
Right.
play with that, but this you don't have any room to play with. So what you do is you put the maximum you can into every tax deferral while you're taking income from this, because it will wash at that point in time,
Okay.
right? So
All right.
that's why it is what it is. But look, you need to take it out over the 10-year period. You need to start taking the distributions, regardless of what they're saying. You could leave it there till 10 years, but you'd hate to voluntarily pay more income tax. Well, maybe you'd like that. Voluntarily pay more
No.
income tax.
Nope. No, don't like that at all.
Yeah. So that's what you want to do.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate
glad
the
you
call.
called. And Pat,
It's hard to keep track.
I think it was last week that someone called about this backdoor Roth conversion, right, where you do excess after-tax contributions to your 401k, just some loophole no one in Congress ever said, let's design good retirement policy with tax law. It's all, the 401k that came not because it was someone designed a retirement plan. It was a financial professional was reading this subsection 401k and said, wait a minute, we can set up a payroll deducted retirement account based upon these rules. Yeah. That's how the 401k came to be, right? It wasn't like Congress said, then they said, well, we better put some limits on it. And
if you build
these IRAs,
if you built a house like you designed tax law, no one would live in it.
It'd be a disaster. Which is why tax planning has become so important to overall financial planning and wealth management.
And retirement planning. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. We have a team of CPAs whose job, in large part, is to help with the tax planning to ensure that we're maximizing where we can maximize. And
yes,
because look, when you're talking about the difference between giving, most people aren't in a 10% bracket, but the majority of Americans are in 12%. Actually, half Americans don't pay any income taxes, but they don't have any dollars saved.
It doesn't really.
So let's talk about people that have dollars saved. Even people with dollars saved, a lot of them are in a 12% tax bracket. And the right kind of planning means we either pay 12% or up to 37%.
Which is exactly, this question was, who was right? And our answer was, it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because what we do know, and we're waiting for clarification.
We implied that she had a pension coming because she mentioned the 457, which meant state employee or some sort of government employee. And
yes, we did imply that.
I implied that, and
I
assume
did.
you
I did as well.
So, yeah. So it's not like there was going to be a couple of years of planning where there was no income.
That's why she was comfortable that her income would be the same.
Anyway, all right, let's continue on with calls here. We're talking with Brian. Brian, you're with Allworth's Money Matters.
Hi, Scott and Pat.
Hi, Brian.
Love the show. I listen
Thank you.
every Saturday to the podcast.
Awesome.
Always enjoy it. I got a question that's maybe your view as financial advisors and parents could be helpful. I had lunch with my dad a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about finances, and he was saying how him and my mom would like to help me maybe purchase a home, whether it be for personal or investment. He's helped my older brothers with home purchases, and they want to kind of equalize it, which I appreciate.
Yeah, it's pretty normal.
And he's pretty keen for me to invest in real estate, but my investment style has been saving as much as I can and investing in index funds. And so I don't know if he's biased towards real estate.
So do you already own a home?
No.
How old are you?
38.
Have you owned a home in the past?
No, I've just rented, just to keep my housing costs as low as possible so I can put away. Eventually I got to a good emergency savings and then eventually good 401k. And by then houses were rather expensive, and I'm not married, no kids. And then recently I like to travel. So I'm out of the country. Could be 3 to 6 months a year.
That changes things.
Yeah.
And so when you move out of the country, do you keep your rental or do you give it up?
Last time I kept it for about 3 months, but this time I'm thinking it's time to move on anyway, and I'm going to get rid of it.
You're gainfully employed?
Yes, I can work remote, and I'm able to kind of do
People,
both.
listen, I don't get this lifestyle.
Oh, no. Where did I go wrong?
I know.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So you sit down on an island and you actually have like a Photoshop bookshelf behind you when there's really a beach.
Brian, you said you're 37?
38.
38.
38.
And what's your income ballpark from your employment?
150,000.
And what do you have saved?
Everything.
Everything 430,000, 300 of which is retirement tax advantage, and the rest is money market and index funds.
I hear that you don't want to buy a home.
Yeah, why would you want to buy a home?
Yeah, I don't. So it's like, do I convince my dad that, this is my strategy? I certainly appreciate the funds, and my thought would be to invest most of the money into VTI and maybe
how
take those
old is
small
your dad?
chunks to fund travel. He's 74, and they're pretty well set for their retirement.
They're not
I'm
doing this for
taking
estate
away.
tax purposes then.
They want to even out.
No.
They've gifted their other
Yeah,
two kids.
they want to give to. And what do you think of getting a rental home?
I think it's kind of like, I work in real estate as an accountant, and it's kind of like chefs in restaurants. They don't cook all day and then go home and make elaborate meals. And I think when I get home, I'm just tired of looking at real estate, and I prefer, my strategy is to focus on my time on my career, travel, and then passive investing versus most people I talk to don't like being a landlord.
Yeah, I don't like being a landlord.
I could live with it.
And then the house, at my index funds, I don't have to put
I get it.
furniture in them. I
You know, it's funny.
to pay
So I'm going to tell you.
property tax.
So 2 days ago, I'm on a walk with my wife, and I said to her, actually, I'm on a walk with my wife, and I got a text from a property manager. Hey, can you please call me? And I, is the house on fire? Right. And I text back, and the washer was broken, and he thought it's time to get a new washer and dryer.
Your mutual fund never calls you.
I said to my wife, and it's been a good investment but I said to my wife, I really love equities. And I said, here's the conversation we had.
You had this conversation with your wife on a walk.
She barely tolerated it, but yes. I was
How romantic.
No, well, and I said, one of the benefits about getting a little older, you're still quite young. You didn't remember the pain of the financial crisis. One of the benefits of getting older, you've lived through all these cycles, and you see that companies, the values of companies continue to grow. And when you look over the long-term return, you mentioned VTI, the total stock market index, you look at the long-term return of stocks, it's about 6 to 7 percentage points above that of the rate of inflation. It's hard to replicate that in any other asset class.
It is.
Real estate, rental, anything.
It is.
And it never calls you and says the washer's
And there's no
broken.
leverage in there, so the downside risk isn't as great.
Correct.
So just tell your,
I would have a conversation. I'd have a conversation with your dad and say, "Look, my lifestyle's a little unconventional,
but I'm happy. I'm assuming you're happy.
I would love to take these dollars and invest them for the long term for my own financial security, just like my brother's financial, but in a slightly different way."
And I'd take it one step further. I would take a clip of this show and say, "Hey, I talked to these guys that I listened to their podcast, and this is what they said." And quite frankly, your dad may know. And by the way, that's the only way we're gaining listeners is one at a time. But it might change his view of the world enough that says, "Oh, okay, well, my son's taking this seriously," and he reached out to these financial professionals that manage, $20 billion, and they kind of under $19 billion, and they kind of understand it. So here's where you go, Dad, and see where it lands. But quite frankly, if I had a child like yours that said to me, "This is what I'd like to do," I'd say, "Okay, makes sense."
So, yeah. And so I have 4 kids, 28, 26, 16, and 13, right? Same wife, just a big spread. My oldest daughter, I just helped with the purchase of her first house. And I told my son, who's 26, I said, "Hey, 2 years from now, maybe sooner, but 2 years from now, actually, it might be then next year before the tax laws change. 2 years from now, I'm going to do something similar for you. But I already know he's just a different kind of guy. And for him, he's probably not going to want to buy a house.
At least at that point in time.
At that point in time. So I'll probably structure something different for him. Hopefully, he'll allow me to coach him some because this is my profession. But to help guide him in what to do. But I don't think it would be buying a home for him. But I would still feel the desire to let that
something that has similar economic value to that child.
Yeah, so he doesn't feel like I'm playing favorites. And I don't want to play favorites, and I want to help him get launched in life.
So, Brian, that's the answer to the question. I have a couple questions for you. Of these places you've traveled and worked, what was your favorite?
Oh, recently it would probably be Malaga, Spain, although I almost don't want people to find out about it, but that was really
Is that
really
the southern
good.
tip?
Yeah, that's in the southern tip. You can take a ferry to Africa just about, but yeah, great weather, has the old town, has the beach.
I've actually been to Malaga.
All right, second favorite.
Second favorite.
Where do you plan on going next?
Lisbon was quite good.
I like
Lisbon's
Lisbon.
a great
I've never
city.
been to Lisbon.
That's
I
getting
like
a little overcrowded, but it was quite good.
Yeah, it's got quite
And
the
next
American.
Next stop's Italy.
And where?
Where in Italy?
Yeah.
Starting in Milan because the flight path is good from Sacramento, where I am. But then hop on a train and go wherever looks good. Maybe towards the south.
And where's your next place you're going?
That's what Milan is.
Oh, Milan.
That's
your
the next
Milan,
place.
yeah.
Yeah, good for you.
Italy.
Listen, live it.
Yeah.
As my kids would say, that boy can send it.
I thought that's more of like a ski term.
Yes.
Yeah,
But it
okay.
goes in life, too. Like, live it.
My kids have that tattooed on the side of their foot, and their cousins do. Send it.
Do they really?
Yeah, send it.
That had to be.
And I told my wife I'd want to do it just to have the bond with my kids.
I would do it other than it sounds grossly painful to get your foot tattooed.
I have no tattoos.
I appreciate
Thanks,
the call,
Brian.
Brian. It's got to be painful.
But it can't be that painful.
Have your foot tattooed?
It can't. I mean, come on.
I don't have any.
A variety of different pains.
I will pay for that tattoo, Scott, just because I think it'd be funny with a tattoo.
I had a conversation the other day with my wife on it because she's opposed to it. And I told her at Christmas, I said, "What does she want for Christmas?" I said, "I want to send a tattooed on the side of my foot." Okay. It's just totally out of character for me. I understand.
Oh, it is. It's 100% out of character.
But I think my kids would really
They're
get a
like,
kick out of it.
Dad's like,
they would get a kick.
Dad
out of
gets it.
Dad, and I'm a quite avid skier, and I ski with my kids.
And
so
you send
I
it.
can send it.
You can
actually.
send it.
Not like many people can send it.
Yes. My son just broke his hand snowboarding. Had to put a pin in it.
Oh, really?
My youngest, yeah. 3 weeks ago.
I was on a trip to Alaska years ago, and my buddy slipped on ice walking and broke his hand. And one of the guys on our trip was an orthopedist, and we went to the local town, a little dock in the box thing.
Really?
They let him set his hand, and they set the cast so that he could hold a ski pole.
And you
Right? And so he
And you
skied the trip.
continue the trip?
Yes. He should have send it. If anyone should have send it tattooed, that
Holy
guy should have
smokes.
send it.
Yeah, I always travel with an orthopedist. That's how I roll.
You know, it's interesting, this last call, though. I've got a friend of mine who's roughly my age. I'm late 50s. He has no children, single guy, and his lifestyle is very similar. And I'll call him sometimes, and he'll be. Last I talked to him, he was in Australia, and last year he was in Spain for a few months. He was in Croatia for a few months, and he'll rent these houses for like 3 months at a time.
And he's okay being by himself, obviously.
He's he's never been married, so
Yeah,
I figure
see,
he's a certain kind of personality, right?
Yes. I mean, it sounds really exciting,
And he's
but I
one of those
couldn't do it.
I've known for 20-some years, and he's always said he'd kind of like to be married. I'm thinking, I don't think he really would.
That's what you say.
Because you probably would be. My guess is you've dated a few nice women over the years.
Yes.
When you're 57.
It's not them, it's you.
I think so. Yeah. But it's interesting. You just kind of look every once in a while like, wow, that seems like a really, like our last call, that seems like a really interesting lifestyle. Not sure I'd really want that.
I could not do it.
Yeah.
I know that for
All
a
right.
fact.
Hey, we're going to talk now to one of our, this is our regional our regional director advisor, Brian James, in our Cincinnati office. Brian's a certified financial planner. Again, leads our Cincinnati office and has been with us for a number of years. Brian, thanks for taking some time to join us.
Yeah, you bet. Always enjoy it.
Yeah, so
we have these conversations occasionally
once
with
a
some of
quarter or
our
something like
advisors
that, yeah.
to kind of like, what's financial planning look like in the real world versus someone just calling a radio show / podcast and getting short
That's
interactions.
exactly right. Yeah, these are actual clients. Like what the problem was, what happened. So.
What were the solutions? What was the outcome? Oftentimes, we have no idea what the outcome is with the advice that we give. We just assume it's all perfect. But
So, Brian, I know when you worked with some medical professionals employed by a big hospital chain. Tell us about that story and what was going on there.
Yeah, sure. So it's a very interesting case. She does a little bit on the side for various organizations. She's an anesthesiologist, so she got her own practice on the side, and she works as part of a large hospital. And everybody knows about this. It's all in the up and up. It's just kind of complicated and confusing. So for her own practice, she's basically a small business, and that opens up a number of opportunities. There are really cool things you can do in that case. If you are your own sole practice and you don't have any employees, you can do something that's called a solo K or an individual 401k, which can allow you to put up to $70,000 in the right situation away pre-tax if you want to.
Yeah, and this is these are self-employed people, right? That can do. Because sometimes people look at a SEP IRA and think that's the limit or whatnot, but these solo Ks, they allow you to do the same kind of contribution limits as like a profit sharing plan would if you establish for yourself.
So this was
exactly.
Was this a side business for her?
Yes, this was a side business. The same thing. She just did what she did doing anesthesiology for some local practices as what she did for the hospital.
So she's
pretty
that
common.
Added some wrinkles.
Yeah, which is, by the way,
exactly.
for anesthesiologists, pretty common that you would belong to a group and then you do some time in these skin care or
little surgery centers.
Surgery centers all over the place. So when you went to her, was the discussion that she wanted to save more? Was it taxes? Did you consider a defined benefit pension plan, or was that too much?
So here's how these conversations start, right? You asked about, what is it like real world financial planning? Most people don't know the questions that they should be asking. They just know that they have a bunch of stuff happening and they're probably missing opportunities because they haven't taken the time to learn about them. So yes, we absolutely looked at all of those different options: defined benefit pension plan, sticking with a simple SEP IRA maybe if she wanted to keep it super simple. But in her case, she wasn't going to be working that much longer. And they also have some other things, right? It's not all about how can I stuff a bunch of money in my 401k. They also had investment properties and kids getting through college, so they needed some cash flow now. So that ruled out the defined benefit plan.
And
but for them, the solo K was a great compromise.
A defined benefit plan, here's how it can work really well for particularly someone who's nearing retirement with no employees. Because you can say, what if I had a pension that promised me $30,000 a year in retirement?
And you're 55 years of age.
Well, you just run the numbers. How much do I need to set aside in this retirement plan to fund $30,000? And it might be $150,000 a year, which
if it's all your income, it's all your income.
It enables you to shove boatloads into retirement plans for the right circumstances.
It really does.
It's
a time value calculation, right? Exactly. Of present value, what can I put in now to create a pension for myself who's going to retire in 3, 4, 5 years? Which, if you've got the cash flow to support it, and you don't have a bunch of employees to worry about, then it can work great. In her case, lots of other obligations.
Got it. And so for the rest of the listeners, if you're self-employed, late in your career, looking to really stock away some money quickly in your income, you have a lot of options. The pension plan is a little defined benefit pension plan. It's a little bit more expensive administratively, but I've seen it work beautifully for the certain
you basically
situation.
need an actuary in the mix to make sure you're doing the calculations right. This is not something you're going to do on TurboTax on your own. This is why all the financial people have careers.
We have a division that specializes in that.
That's right.
Out of our Phoenix office, Scottsdale office.
That's why we exist. Go figure.
So, and then how much was she able to put away?
Oh, in her case, so she ended up going with the individual K because that allowed her to accomplish her other goals that had nothing to do with any of this. So in her case, it's up to $70,000, depending on how much she makes. So another concern she had was she wanted to slow down a little bit. She can control the throttle on her career. And she's hit a point where she wants to be backing off a little bit. So that will limit that $70,000 if she wants to, but that's now her choice. But she's got a much higher ceiling than she did before when she only had a SEP IRA.
So it's essentially any work that she's doing outside of the hospital system is going 100% to her retirement.
Exactly. If that's the way she wants to run it. She can change that year to year, but it also has to be coordinated with her hospital's benefit plans too. You can't have 10 jobs and max out all the 401ks. The IRS caught on to that a while ago.
Yeah. So whatever she contributes in her employer, excluding the match, whatever employer match, that's yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Tell us about another client situation. Yeah.
Sure. So moving on, then the other one I had some fun with here was this is another case. A little younger couple, both professional, decent income, making about $350 between the two of them.
I would say that's decent income, Brian. I don't know.
That's very decent income. They're doing quite well. Which that brings with it questions, right? So it answers a lot of questions, but it brings a whole set of new ones, which is we could be doing other things. What are the things we should be doing? I don't know. We should go talk to somebody. And that's how they came to me. They were at a point where the kids were getting bigger and the house was getting smaller seemingly. And they were starting to think about, well, maybe we're bored with this neighborhood. Maybe we need to go buy a bigger house just to kind of change things up a little bit. But they knew that was going to have a cost to it. So we ran a financial plan to say, look, yeah, you can afford this. This is not a question of can you. It's a question of should you, meaning what sacrifices will you have to make to get there? Because it's got to come from somewhere. So we basically said your jobs are going to stay the same, but you have a bigger expense monthly. Where will that come from? So we had to reduce what they were putting away into their 401ks and 529s to account for a larger mortgage payment. And we ran the numbers that way. And in the end, they decided, you know what? A bigger house will make us happier in the short run, but it won't be that long, 6-7 years before the kids are all up and out of the house anyway. And now we have a great big gigantic house with too many bedrooms. So what their thought was, after doing all of that, the decision was, let's continue to focus on the savings. We'll just live with the house now. It's not that bad. And then we'll focus on our retirement home when the kids are gone.
It's because they had trouble seeing what the cost of the bigger house was going to be, right? And when you sat with them and ran the numbers and said, here's how many more years you're going to need to work, I would imagine that was one of the...
Here's the sacrifice you will need to make in order to buy this bigger house.
Well, because if you reduce your savings for retirement, here's what this means for your retirement.
Which I gotta admit this. I grew up in a family with 5 kids. And people are like, I need a bigger house. And I'm like, I don't think that's a need. Because the house I grew up with.
In this particular case, it would have set up arguments in the future because it wouldn't have mattered eventually, and they would have started talking about, we shouldn't have bought this house 5 years ago. We should have done something different because now we have a big house that we have to sell, and maybe or maybe not the market is conducive to selling.
And they're making $350, and they're probably thinking this is what people who make $350 are supposed to do.
Yeah, well, they see it. They see people, their friends are moving to different neighborhoods.
I get it.
Everybody's bored in their current home. I need something shiny to look at.
Yeah, and after several months, I feel the same as the previous home.
Yeah, that's because they moved with the house. But the point being is it's really important that you can do what-if scenarios in financial planning, where you could actually say, this is what will happen if you make this move. This is what will happen if you stay where you're at. Oh, and by the way, you did them a large favor, quite frankly, by getting that off the plate. Like they knew the cost associated with that.
Guys, I'll tell you my absolute favorite moment as a financial planner, my favorite moment is when I have talked a client through all the pros and cons. Here's option A, B, and C, and here's the pros and cons of each one. And they understand it enough where in the case of a married couple, as soon as they stop looking at me and they look at each other, then I know I've done my job and they understand what their options are. And now they're going to talk about which one they're going to choose. That is the absolute best feeling in the world.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I totally agree with you, Brian. Thanks for taking a little time to be with us. It's interesting, Pat. We really focus on education. We've been doing this radio program for a long time, right? We do a lot of webinars, seminars about education, and it's to Brian's point. It's like when people can understand
their situation.
their situation, then they're empowered to make wise choices for themselves.
regardless of what their neighbors are doing.
That's right. What's going to make the most sense for them? So
Comparison is the thief of joy.
I'd never heard that before. That's probably true. The sin of comparison. Always look into your neighbor.
Yeah. Comparison is the thief of joy. I read that quote. I wish I remembered who said it.
Well, hey, it's been great being here with everyone this weekend. Glad you took the time to be part of Allworth's Money Matters. If you like this program, please do us a favor, give us a review or forward on to someone that you think could benefit from it. We'll see you next week. This has been Scott Hansen and Pat McClain.
This program has been brought to you by Allworth Financial, a registered investment advisory firm. Any ideas presented during this program are not intended to provide specific financial advice. You should consult your own financial advisor, tax consultant, or estate planning attorney to conduct your own due diligence.